the nature will accept changes as we make to a certain point. After that, it's going to fight back. And it's going to fight back in such a way that we'll have to pay very high price for it. So that is what has happened in Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh.
Hello, I am Nidheesh Tyagi from Abir. Welcome to this special edition of Abir Samvaad happening in Guwahati at Jaquar Orientation Center. For this very special edition of Samvaad at Jaguar, we have a very special guest, Mr. Pinaki Bhatacharjee. He's an architect practicing in Guwahati for last about 30 years. He's a pass out of Trichy, and we are going to kind of talk to him about the region, his practice, and his worldview from Guwahati about architecture, aesthetic, art, and design. Welcome, Mr. Bhatacharjee.
Thank you so much.
So we begin with your, if you can run us through your journey so far, how, and maybe do it in reverse chronology. What are you now, and then we can go back to your story.
So it's been almost 24-25 years that I'm practicing architecture here in this part of the country. And ever since I passed out in 1994 from RUC Trichy. Now it's NIT. In fact, during the curriculum, there is also a mandatory period of 6 months training, if in case you are aware of architecture program. So I did my training here in Guwahati. And even after passing out, I joined the same firm where I did my training. Practiced there for under a very senior architect for 3-4 years before I started setting up my own practice. I have a partner in a firm, Anjay Gupta. He is also from the same college, and he was just 1 year junior to me. And we are practicing together ever since.
If you can tell us about the projects you have done, you think this is what kind of stands for your journey so far, or kind of big ticket, calling card kind of stuff.
In a way, I can say that we were lucky that when we started our practice here in Guwahati, the architecture, perhaps the sense and the requirement of architecture and architectural practice had picked up or started picking up then. So we were fortunate enough that we started getting projects from the beginning. And believe me, there is a need for housing. It's just not unique to this part of the country, it's all over India, the need for housing. So most of the works are catered around housing projects. Not to say we have done other commercial projects also. We have been associated with some hospital projects, but yes, there is a little bit of inclination as far as I am concerned towards the hospitality industry. So that's one area wherein if in case I get better opportunities, I'll definitely like to explore more.
How have in last 25 years since you have been practicing, and before that, of course, you have been studying architecture, how have the houses in this tier 2, tier 3, the middle class, the service economy, capital cities of, not so large states, probably the way we see it? I can compare it to Guwahati, can you compare it to Bhopal, similar kind of, cities. So how the housing has kind of evolved during these years? How do you see that?
See, there are a few features that I would like to stress upon while dealing on this subject. As when I started practicing, or ever since my birth, what I have been seeing around in the city is that very low-rise Assam type housing, which we generally call high-pitched roof with CGI sheet roofing, and that is what we were used to seeing. With larger plot areas, and gradually over a period of time, the housing requirement started increasing. Housing requirement within the same city limits, we were required to accommodate more number of people, because the infrastructure, spreading the infrastructure of a city is a huge requirement. So the requirement of housing grew, so did the other activity areas started growing. The housing requirement called for multi-level housing. Now, this multi-level housing is something that I have seen it growing in front of my eyes, from single-story, two-storied buildings to suddenly it has now started growing to 15, 20, even beyond.
Yeah.
So it's also another important feature that I would like to talk about is the spending capacity or the affordability of the people, which has increased. Therefore, because when we go high in such a region with zone 5 seismic, yeah, it's important that you spend a lot on steel. It's a very steel intensive construction, and the cost of steel is very high. Therefore, the cost of construction will also go high. Therefore, the affordability of the people is very important in a way.
Yeah.
Apart from that, what we used to see in olden times is that bigger plot, small houses, you have a huge foreground, huge backyard. So those things are losing gradually, because from these tier 2, tier 3 cities, what is happening, the next generation is migrating either to bigger cities or even abroad. What is left are the old generation with these small, with this huge property which they are unable to maintain. So generally they hand it over to promoters, keep a small part for themselves, and the rest is on sale. That is how we have seen housing growing.
And how smooth is this transition from, this like this old bungalows and bigger spaces to, selling it and making it multi-storied developer kind of house?
It's very hard on the person who are actually giving away this plot, seeing their houses being destroyed to create such high-rise constructions. But it's the need of the hour. They cannot maintain it.
And as an experiential, like, the way we have this whole special experience in when we enter into house, how have they changed? Like, so I grew up in like most what we call it, like I grew up, so which city you are from? So I think I grew up in civil lines, so which was like it could be any city, but civil lines will remain same. Like people who live in townships or the people who live in cantonment areas will they have the similar structure. It can be any city, like so, any place. So as experiential thing about the space thing in the house, as moving from the bigger acreage to, but then as an interactive space, how you think it has changed?
Adaptability is something that people are gifted with. So, from a lavish sort of living style to suddenly confined to a small space may be difficult, but people are fast adapting it. It's We never had the concept of having our toilets within the main premises of our house in the olden times.
Yes.
You'll have to walk across a courtyard to reach your washrooms. Herein now you have it all within the same unit. So this is something which has been fast adopted by the generation. Even the old generation has adopted it, older generation.
And how is the functionality and this whole smartness? I think the housing has become so smart in terms of, as you're talking about, that people have become flexible, but the houses, they have also become so functionally smart compared to, giving it like sense of privacy, the use, and as you're talking about that utility spaces.
Yeah, houses have naturally become very smart. We have to accommodate a lot of things in a much smaller place. To, that space has to be smart enough to be adaptable.
Yeah.
So we have a kitchen which is also a utility wash. We have dining rooms which can be converted into bedrooms. So those smartness are there within the design parameters, and we consider them depending on the size of the unit we are expected to design. because we also have to keep in mind what is what is the target customer base, what is their affordability, and we have to, whether or not they can afford a 1 crore 2 crore flat, if they can afford a 50 lakhs rupees flat, even then you'll have to give them the same set of requirements, satisfy the same set of requirements, just that the scale is squeezed.
One thing which I was thinking about, that in this tier 2, tier 3 India, that so there is a, that like we have, you are practicing in Assam and from Guwahati, so there's a whole big traditional, authentic, cultural, and very strong kind of motifs and
Absolutely.
the way people have been, and then the aspiration to become a globally compliant kind of a structure. So how do you balance these two things, because both things are being kind of they are required for the for your client.
Actually, if in case we are addressing a housing problem, a multi-storied housing problem, perhaps the traditional part is less taken care of then. We look into more of the functional aspect, and the cultural and the traditional parts are done in projects wherein it has some significance in that direction. When it comes to housing, multi-storied housing, it's purely more of a functional project. So most of the modern buildings that you see around in the city, it is just like another building any part of in India.
Yes.
It's not unique to Assam. It can be just, you can lift it from here and put it anywhere in India. It's just like the same.
But for the bigger houses and people who are like,
Yes, therein they like all the traditional elements to be incorporated in maximum way possible, even maintaining their living style. I have dealt with a person who wanted a house of his own in a very traditional missing style. Okay, in a very traditional missing style, wherein the kitchen will be a slightly elevated place, wherein rest of the people can sit around, gossip, where the cooking is on. So such things are prevalent when there is ample space and the person is ready to spend on it.
and how much you think that all these, like, because there are like huge number of tribes living in this region, and they have their own. I mean, like bamboo itself is a kind of
Yes.
a massive thing which can probably be part of the whole designing and an element of
Absolutely.
functionality. So how do these things kind of I mean, are they part of it, or they have been like completely abandoned, or there's a kind of a mixed hybrid kind of an arrangement happening?
There are people who are very sensitive. Most of the architects are sensitive about using bamboo in their architectural practice also, but there are groups who are working extensively in the field, and you will see projects which are evolving mostly with bamboo technology here in this part. It's a very demanding subject, very interesting, and we need to train ourselves in order to know the true utility and the potential of this material.
What is your process of design? I mean, how do you start from, if you can run us through this whole idea to outcome kind of a thing, that how do things happen for you with you? Okay.
For most of the projects that I am handling, it's the demand of the client which will give you a direction to your design. We try to accommodate the client's requirement and also some of his wishes through the design that I think will mostly suit his type of requirement. So it's basically a combination of the two, wherein I'll try to give as much of architectural understanding that I have into the project, keeping in mind the client's requirement. It's no point deviating from his requirement completely, trying to force my idea on the person, because finally it is that person who has to feel happy and peaceful living in that space. So if in the back of his mind he says, thinks that this is being imposed on me, I think that way it would have been better. Till I'm able to convince him, it's better to keep his ideas intact.
How, because of this whole pressure, and we're talking about how the spaces have become scarce, and especially in these towns, and that's leading to new kind of structures. What happens to the public spaces? I mean, because this was again, I mean, 30 years back, it would have been a very different kind of a city with lots of open grounds and places. Also, its own iconic kind of,
Guwahati has a major problem with public spaces. Sadly,
it always had it, or like it's happening now?
see, earlier, the growth of the city is in the last 20-25 years. So before 25 years, we never used to think that we will ever reach a position wherein we will run out of public spaces. Now it's the reality. We truly do not have proper utilizable public spaces in forms of parks, playgrounds. Every neighborhood should have one. We don't have it. There is a law which is being recently introduced, whereby the government is trying to take small, even a very small plot that I possess, which I will not be able to utilize in the best possible manner. I shall have the possibility, there is a possibility I can hand it over to the government, whereby the FSI or the FAR that is granted for that plot of land will be given in form of a certificate, which I can put it elsewhere within the same master plan area. Even if in case in those process the government gets back small pockets of land, some of the utility things can be posted there. This is very important. Right now, even if in case you move into some of the roads of Guwahati, you will see dustbins are put on the roads itself. There is no special provision, bigger dustbins. So now these pockets of land, if it is made available to the government can shift the transformers, the dustbins, they can be shifted in those small properties. I think people will also voluntarily come up and give these small plots of land which they are unable to utilize properly. I think people will do that.
Mr. Bhatacharjee, you're talking about your interest in temples, which was like, and you have a very strong connection, you were telling me about,
Right.
with Kamakhya. And so, can you run us through this whole, how do you see temples? Because we're talking about how temples used to be there and how the land will be picked up and how they will be made. I always wonder, because I come from Madhya Pradesh, and right from this Khajuraho to Konark, I mean, there's a very different kind of an architecture happening in temples over, I think, 7-8 centuries. So uniformity and without being monotonous, and then having the same kind of a motifs, structures. So yeah, I mean, I would want to hear from you about what do you think about temples.
See, this is purely my understanding from whatever I have read and what I could analyze and understand. This is, I feel that the temples, the older temples, the traditionally known temples, you call it in the south Tirupatis and Rameshwaram
Right.
temples, or in the north, whichever important temples we have. Many of the temples in the North India were destroyed. So Kashi Vishwanath or Somnath temple, anything you talk about. So, I mean, what happens is that I felt that the temples were not constructed on any given plot of land. They were very selected. They were selected by experts, because I feel that at every point the earth releases some energy. Maybe some energies are good, some are bad. Wherein the release of energy is high, positive energy, most of the temples, these olden temples, were constructed on those areas. Why I tell so? If in case you analyze a temple, the olden temple structures, the old ones which were not destroyed, which still stands, you'll find even in Kamakhya, if you go, the main sanctum sanctorium, there will be a Nath Mandir we call, which is before the main temple wherein the deity is put. So in that portion, you will have lots of fenestration, lots of openings. You can come in, go out through multiple doors and windows. Why suddenly the architects of that time felt that wherein the sanctum sanctorium is there, it should have only one single opening? Have you noticed with all the olden temples, where the main deity sits, there's only one single opening, and often the opening size is much smaller than you literally have to bend down to enter into that. It's because that is where the release of energy is maximum. It is what they felt, that we should be able to trap that energy to the maximum extent possible, and that can be done when you have less number of openings. But without a single opening, nobody will be able to come in. So even in some of the South Indian temples, still it's a practice that the male who walks into the temple walks almost bare chested, that your body is able to absorb maximum energy possible. So it's a storehouse of energy, and therefore is a visit to a temple, I feel, is important. Maybe many of the philosophies or the theories run this way: God is there everywhere, why should I go to a temple? It's there at my home. Yes, it's there, but for people like us who doesn't have the capacity to energize themselves, better go to a temple, of such temple wherein you get some good positive energy in your body. You actually feel the vibe when you go in such a temple. This is, I feel, this is my understanding. So the importance of temple and their location, not any ordinary person. Today, if in case you ask an architect or a super specialist architect to choose a site wherein a temple which has the maximum range, you'll naturally take help of some machines and equipments. They either had those equipments then which we don't know, or they could make certain calculations wherein they could derive such location. So this is my understanding. There are a lot of things apart from that which I feel about a temple, the importance of temple and the visit of temple. So
And about the design of temple, I mean, so we are actually getting into a kind of time where we are going to have one of the biggest temples being made in this country right now, and then we have a huge, rich history of temples and its architecture.
yeah, very true. The location of the temple is the same as the original one. So I don't have any doubts about the release of energy and the energy point of that space. But about the design and the principles, I think they must have, there are such intelligent people to cover those areas also. It has also been designed in the same principle.
Is it okay to talk about this Guwahati's relationship with Brahmaputra? I mean, how this, because this is the other thing which is not just, happening here, but in most cities now, the river and the city, the relationship between them is also changing. The basis of number of people kind of dependent on that, and that industry and all that is also happening around it, right through the Ganges in all of Uttar Pradesh and probably here. So what is the relationship of Guwahati and Brahmaputra? If you could talk about.
Actually, the city of Guwahati has developed because of the river Brahmaputra. Earlier it was the waterways which used to connect us. Even we were invaded by the Britishers through this waterway. Guwahati was captured coming through the waterways, and they landed in a place called, first they landed in a place called Shukreshwar. That's the gate wherein they entered for the first time. So it's the great connect. Our terrains were so difficult, they could hardly climb up the hills to to come into this area. So water was a good connectivity. And now again, the inland water services, there is an improvement and there is a thrust to develop this as a trade route also, plus a tourism route also. Apart from that, we largely depend the city of Guwahati, unless I think there is a lot of water which is pumped from underground to serve the needs of the city. But this can be curtailed or even minimized to an extent that we hardly would require any underground water if the potential of the river is tapped. because the length of it's a longish type of a city, and the entire spread is along the river.
Yeah.
It's now spreading on the other side of the river also. So if in case we are able to tap proper water points from the Brahmaputra, I think we will be able to feed the entire city properly.
The other thing is also about this whole, the great environment of the ecosystem of Northeast. And I mean, do you think that this has been factored in the master plans and the constructions happening and the way they are? I mean, we saw a huge kind of a deluge happening in Himachal recently, big time constructions, and then suddenly it's all like failing, faltering. So, how do you think about managing this whole ecological environmental balance?
That's a very dicey question, actually. I'll tell you, the nature will accept changes as we make to a certain point. After that, it's going to fight back. And it's going to fight back in such a way that we'll have to pay very high price for it. So that is what has happened in Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh. This region is no different. In the idea of developing places, we start destroying nature way beyond repair. In Meghalaya, you'll be amazed to see hills and the hillocks are completely chopped off to bring it to a single level. Will not there be an implication of it in the long run? There has to be some effect. In Shillong, we never, even in Shillong, if in case you go, the buildings which were there about 20-25 years back, you won't find even a ceiling fan in it. The ceiling heights are low. But nowadays, we need air conditioning in Shillong. So such is the change of environment. We are trying to accommodate more than it can hold, the nature can hold. There are multiple problems. We can spread the city horizontally, but yes, horizontally spreading the city needs a lot of fund. Because for creating a horizontal growth, we have to create roads, drainage, lots of infrastructure has to be created. And therefore, we intend, why go further ahead, we do it within the same place and we burden the same place more and more than it can take. That is also happening here in this part of the country. So, there will be some negative fallouts of it, of course. This year, the last year, we had temperature climbing to almost 38, 39, 40 degrees Celsius, which we never faced in India. Earlier, it used to be like, if in case we have a hot day or two consecutive or 3 consecutive hot days, means for sure it is going to rain on the 3rd day. But nowadays we have stretches, and herein we were used to seeing rainfall continuing for days together, non-stop, just that the intensity will drop and again will pick up. Such was the condition for days together, for weeks together we used to see. Nowadays it don't even go for half an hour in one stretch. So we have seen the fallout of urbanization or ruthless development, should we say.
How do you see the future of these cities? Like these, these are like signature important cities in the region. But then how do you think that you have already been working for the last 25 years here, and you've been here for like 12 generations, as you were telling me. So the next 25, 30 years, the span
I see a sea change in the type of development. Sea change it will be. We have now been signatory to reducing the carbon footprint as a nation. So there will be some stringent.
More green buildings.
Absolutely. And there are buildings which are being developed, which are more eco-friendly buildings, because we need buildings. It's not that we don't require. We are building because there is a need for it. But how can we make it more sustainable? So there will be sea change in the programs. Nowadays, what we used to do, we used to have from the discharge from our toilets, we used to have something called a septic tank, and then it would run into the main drain. But nowadays, it has become mandatory that you check your discharge through STP and maintain a level the pollution level is controlled so that the discharge is acceptable. So, such is happening that we have to reuse water. We have to see that the energy, there is a part of the energy in such bigger projects, it's a part of energy we generate ourselves through solar means. So the energy consumption gets reduced. These are initial stages. We will see many more changes, dynamic and scientific changes coming up, which will be accepted by the new generations, and they'll be more apt with it.
One of the things which we want to talk about, because Abir Pothi is an art newspaper, and we also keep talking about to architects about where are the meeting points between art and architecture and aesthetics and design. Where does art feature in your scheme of things as a practicing architect?
Interestingly, art features in every project of mine at the beginning. And then as we start this discussion between the clients keep growing, we tend to dissuade from art into more of a functional and try to sideline the art part of it to a great extent and cover it mostly with architecture and architecture. That is what we see in today's architecture form mostly. But yes, not just me, I think for every architect, he visualizes the building, or he or she would visualize a building as a form of art which will be very dear to that person. But yeah, somewhere there is a compromise that we make because of many requirements, and finally, as much as it is possible to preserve, we preserve. The rest of it is lost.
And what about the art in public spaces? Like, how much you see? Because as we say that the whole character of a region or a city is also about the motifs it has, an iconic kind of places it has. So how do you see that happening in Guwahati and surrounding areas?
So Guwahati as such is seen as a city which is just not the gateway to the northeast part of India, but also as a gateway to the entire Southeast Asia. So our development should focus on creating an environment plus cultural art motif which will have ample representation of entire Southeast Asian countries.
What will be your, if you are such a senior kind of practicing architect, what will be your advice to your younger version? I mean, say, who are just 24 and they just come out of the college and trying to practice architecture or design. What will you tell him?
I think there is one thing I would like to stress upon. Immediately after passing out, one should practice under a senior architect for some time, because that is also where you learn architecture as in the practical form. Then you can set up your own practice, and they are extremely intelligent, extremely adaptive. They will be able to give a much better world to the future requirement of this country.
And what do we tell to young artists who are basically, because Abir also has its whole thing about hinterland, artists coming from hinterland, small, lots of people from Northeast kind of come and participate in our shows, and we showcase, on them on our art gallery. We talk about them. So what do they do to, get some kind of a connection or some kind of a engagement with architects and real estate and the industry or acceptance?
I think scope is increasing with the affordability. See, this is one aspect which will be covered only when you are being able to cover the rest of the remaining mandatory requirements. But nowadays, people look beyond mandatory requirements, and therefore these are reflections even in an apartment building or a society. These are reflections of the society and the cultural, what is called aspirations of the entire society. So they create space, they provide that space wherein such things can be in display.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattacharjee, for coming for this show, and we'll keep talking to you, and then maybe we'll get you to write for Abir one day, as as we were discussing. Thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of Abir Samvaad.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity.